Welcome back then. Our business editor Matthew Warren with us. It didn't take very long for those markets to lose their initial enthusiasm for the Cyprus deal.
No, that's right. We saw an initial rally and then that all turned around. And what drove that was comments from the Dutch Finance Minister Jeroen Dijsselbloem. He's also the head of the Eurogroup of finance ministers. Now, he gave an interview to the Financial Times and Reuters, and in that he seemed to suggest that perhaps making deposit holders pay when banks get into trouble could be a way forward across the Eurozone. Well, more in this report from Josh Vardy.
One comment that spooked markets worldwide. Hours after unveiling the deal aimed at saving Cyprus's banking sector, Eurogroup President Jeroen Dijsselbloem appeared to say in an interview that it could lay a template for future Eurozone crises. He suggested that if banks cannot recapitalize themselves, shareholders, bondholders and even deposit holders could be made to provide liquidity. In tackling the crisis previously, European financial leaders had focused on creating funds like the ESM that could step in to recapitalize banks. For Cyprus, Dijsselbloem said the new method was to look for a way emergency instruments like the ESM would not have to be used. This means financial institutions would either have to recapitalize themselves or, like in Cyprus, face using capital from deposit holders. Markets reacted with dismay, with European bank shares plummeting, especially in Italy and Spain. Later in the day, Dijsselbloem's office released a statement in an effort to limit some of the damage, saying that in fact the Cyprus case was unique and that no template had been discussed. This analyst from Cyprus agrees. He says it's his country's fault they now have to swallow a bitter pill.
A big chunk of what happened was our responsibility. So when you make mistakes, you pay a price for it. So you can't blame the EU entirely. The EU could have adopted a lenient approach if it had the option.
There have been 5 bailouts in the Eurozone over the past few years, but Cyprus stands as the first where deposit holders have been directly hit.
So what about today then? Those markets haven't pulled themselves together at all?
Yes, now we can just take a look at how markets are opening in Europe, and it seems like they are managing to make a few gains compared to yesterday. Those are London, Paris, Frankfurt, all up about 0.25%, and now Milan and Madrid suffered some big losses yesterday. They were down around 2.5%. No great improvement, it seems, although that could be the close from there. Now, the Asian markets, meanwhile, let's take a look at those. Those have closed for the day. Now, the Nikkei and the Shanghai Composite both down, as you can see there, but some small gains on the Kospi there in South Korea.
Now, back to another story we've been talking about in the news bulletin. We're going to take you to South Africa, in fact. A big gathering starting this Tuesday.
Yes, now this is a meeting of the so-called BRICS. Now, the BRICS is a term that was coined by Goldman Sachs in 2001 and used to refer to these countries: Brazil, Russia, India and China. Now, it said those 4 economies would overtake the biggest Western economies by 2032, and they invited South Africa into that club, adding the S on the end in 2011. Well, to discuss this in more detail, we're joined by Alexandre Kateb. Now, he's an economist and lecturer at the Sciences Po University here in Paris, and you've also written a book about the BRICS. Alexandre, thanks very much for joining us here in the studio. Now, I just wanted to start by asking you, they're all getting together, starting that meeting this Tuesday in South Africa. What specifically are they hoping to achieve, these 5 countries?
Well, they are hoping to rebalance their relations with Africa, and more specifically, they want to create a BRICS development bank that would challenge the World Bank and that would bring new resources both to these countries taken together and to other developing countries and more specifically African development countries.
You say African development, the meeting in Durban. How can Africa benefit specifically, do you think, from these other BRIC countries, if you take the S off the end?
Well, Africa is perceived as the last frontier in the economic world, and the BRICS countries are perceived as an alternative to the former colonial powers because they have more cash power now, and they can bring more resources to Africa. China has been very active in Africa, and the other BRICS countries also want to have their share of this African growing pie. And it's a mutually beneficial relation as long as they bring new technology, new manpower to these African countries.
Now, these 5 countries, they're so different, aren't they, in terms of their size, their growth prospects, their interests as well, to some degree. Is it sensible to look at them as a group, call them the BRICS? Does it make sense?
Well, it's true that they are very different in many ways. There are some energy producers like Brazil and Russia, energy consumers like China and India. But they have also common positions on a range of subjects on global economic governance, on global financial governance. They want to push for reform of the Bretton Woods institutions, and they want to leverage on their growing economic power as the true drivers of the global economy in a new globalization, a 2.0 globalization, if you wish, that is a South-South globalization in essence.
So those are the areas where they share common interests. What about the differences? There must be some pretty big differences as well between them.
Yes, there are differences. The first one is related to energy because, Russia and Brazil benefit from high commodity prices. And China and India, which have to import a big share of these communities, they are looking for this. They are hungry for these commodities. And there is also the trade dispute between them because China has flowed the world with its cheap manufacturing goods, and the other countries, the unions, the business associations in Russia, in Brazil, in South Africa are kind of reluctant to welcome all these Chinese products that are very competitive and that can destroy local jobs. Actually.
Now, as we saw, they invited South Africa into the club in 2011. There, other candidates have been mentioned, countries like Indonesia, Mexico, that perhaps should also be part of this fast-growing club. What do you think about that? Who should be part of this?
Well, definitely there are other candidates. I see 2 potentials. One's Indonesia, of course, which is the largest Muslim country in the world, and that will be a very symbolic sign to let this Muslim country join this club of fast-growing economies. Also Turkey, which can be a candidate, but Turkey hesitates between its membership application to the European Union and a much broader role as the growing regional power in the Middle East and beyond.
And finally, what about the US and the West? I mean, obviously, they're kind of completely out of this, really. Do they look in jealously?
Well, yes, they are. They were like dismissing this BRICS thing as a marketing thing, and now that they see there are these summits held every year, and there are some measures taken like this BRICS Development Bank that might compete with the World Bank, with the IMF. They are seeing this with increasing uneasiness, and they want to bring together the BRICS in a broader format, in the G20, because the United States and Europe see the G20 as the ultimate and only governance forum in the world, and they try to minor the role that could be played by the BRICS.
Okay, well, Alexandre Kateb from Sciences Po here in Paris, thanks very much for joining us to talk about that.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you to Matthew as well. That's just about it from us. Cyril's here with the latest after the break.